Hello, everyone. Will I just check the mics? Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fantastic. And it's actually quite relevant to us at Technology from Sage as well, all of the thoughts around culture, because we haven't talked about this much, but we're a pretty new unit coming together with these 3 different companies that came together last year. And so we are ourselves actually trying to co-create our culture, really understand what we're all about, and hopefully you got a little bit of insight yesterday when I was talking about our purpose and our strategy, but we are, it's constantly a work in progress, so it was really inspiring, Andrew. Thank you. And now you have another award that you need to make sure you maintain for the next year as well. So, emerging technologies. What on earth do we mean by that? I'm just going to introduce us briefly. I've got some questions, but I'd love you to think of questions as well in the audience that we could put to the panel. First off, just to introduce you to the panel. To my left, I'm joined by Talia, VP of Marketing at Springshare, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. I'm also joined by Sean Rife, Chief Research Officer at Scite. We talked a little bit about Scite at the AI workshop yesterday, and hopefully Sean will talk a little bit more in this session if you're not familiar with Scite, but if you're not, I really recommend you take a look at what they're doing, incredibly relevant right now as well. And then, not by Rob, but by John Bentley, Commercial Director at OpenAthens, who's very kindly stepped in to fill Rob's shoes. So, emerging technologies. So before I ask the panel, I'll just give my own thought why we came up with this idea of an emerging technologies session. We wanted to talk a little bit about technology that is perhaps in contrast to some of the large legacy library systems that have been around for decades or more, and talk a little bit about what that might mean for you as libraries, the ways in which emerging technologies and like ourselves look to have support from libraries, look for your input as we develop that technology, which of course is always under development and is very new to the space. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have and get your perspectives on that. Often we are not an established product category, so there's often not an existing budget line in the library. Often we're talking to multiple stakeholders as well. So yes, it's quite an interesting area, and I think surrounded by some fantastic technologies here. So my first question to the panel is what are their biggest challenges as emerging technology? And I thought I would, maybe I would start with Talia, asking your biggest.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? So I'm Talia from Springshare. If that company name does not sound familiar to you, does everyone know LibGuides? Okay, that's us. And so, great question. What are the biggest challenges as emerging tech? So from the cloud-based software as a solution for libraries, kind of what I see as the biggest challenge is generally some hesitance from libraries around adopting emerging technology, right? There can be a wait-and-see approach that comes, I think, sometimes with a weariness of oh gosh, yet another new thing I have to implement and learn and communicate and work into my routine. Believe me, I promise you, I get it. It's exhausting. I can't even tell you how many times at Springshare we've rolled out a new staff communication tool that we just keep rolling out a new one every couple of years. And I think to myself, if I have to do this one more time, so I'm there, I'm with you, but every single time, each new iteration, each new implementation, it gets better and better. It's an upgrade. It solves a problem that we were kind of just dealing with in our day-to-day. And I think one of the things I kind of want to push when I say challenges is that emerging technology can be, it's brand new, right? It's new to the library world. Maybe it's already existing in kind of the regular outside business sector. For example, AI, right? It's been around for a really long time, chat bots and things like that, but it's kind of brand new in the way it's affecting libraries right now. If you start in kind of at the ground floor with a new tech, libraries can really flex your muscles in the development and the outcome of that product or that tool. You know, to kind of give you an example, LibGuides, it was launched in 2007. And we built it as just a subject course guide tool. We saw a need, academic libraries needed to be able to build subject and course guides, great. And then all of a sudden, all of our early adopters started using it for things we hadn't even thought of, which was they built their library website on it. Maybe some of you are doing that. They used it for staff intranets. And they started giving us tons of feedback. You know, you need to add authentication. We hadn't done that, so we added it in. You need to add website-like functionality. Okay, great. Now, being able to add that functionality in the beginning, kind of as the tech was coming up, you know, in the first, say, maybe 1 to 5 years, was easier than doing it 15 years down the road when it's an established tool and it's its own standard at that point. So it's much easier to kind of flex your muscles, you know, as the emerging tech is coming out to kind of influence how it's developed and how that wait and see approach can actually be to your own detriment sometimes. So that's my thought.
That's amazing, Talia. Can I just ask, before we move to just a follow-up question, when you were initially speaking with libraries about their use of LibGuides and working out those different use cases, how did you distinguish between, you know, what is like very unique to one library and what you thought could be, you know, an emerging capability in your technology across all libraries?
Such a good question. So I don't know if you're aware, but at Springshare, a huge number of Springshare employees are librarians, myself included. I was a librarian for 6 years at Johnson & Wales University. So when clients will write in with a feature request, like, can you add this, can you add that, it really helps that we have that base of librarians who actually work in the company that say, oh my gosh, that would have been awesome. You know, yes, I would have loved that at my library, or I'm at a public library, that would have been great for me, or, you know, this feels a little bit snowflakey, so maybe we put it on the request list and see if more people ask for it, kind of thing. So it helps to have that institutional knowledge of librarians to kind of upvote your requests. So yeah, good question.
Thank you, that's fantastic. And just before I turn to Sean, I'm wondering if it'd be good to go to John first from OpenAthens, just given that OpenAthens and Springshare, you know, I guess Scite been around for the last few years, but OpenAthens and Springshare a little bit longer. And I wonder from your perspective, what you see as the biggest challenges, particularly how you spun out of JISC, I understand, yes. And you know, what was it like for you starting out?
Okay, so I'll do a little, because I'm John, not Rob, just so we're clear on that. So I'm going to start with a little introduction about JISC. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with JISC. It's a sector agency specialising in technology, data. We've merged with HISA recently, so now data is a very important part of what we do, and digital services as well. And I work in the Trust and Identity team, which means I work with the UK Access Management Federation, so that's very much about single sign-on and authentication and security. And I also work with the OpenAthens team, and the OpenAthens team develops software for libraries. We develop software for vendors, publishers, platforms, and we also develop software for both, and that's where the federation sits in. So that's kind of just sharing standards, sharing data. The compatibility is really important. And I will just talk about the trends as I see them. I think the trends from our perspective is hyper-personal. So I've encountered a sort of a new role of librarian recently, which is the user experience librarian. And they're dedicated to understanding what the patron needs are. And that seems sort of quite a specific role, but because there's so much tech in the library now, it's a really, really needed role. I think it's driven by data, which creates opportunities as well as risks. And OpenAthens particularly sits in sort of that grey area between utility and privacy, and how we manage that is really important. It's highly collaborative. I think the future of technology is going to be highly collaborative. It sort of speaks to your point about Springshare and OpenAthens and how we work together. Two really important points as well. I think it needs to be ethical. OpenAthens, for example, we develop in sprints. So that's 2 weeks. We set some work for the development teams. You've got 2 weeks to go and deliver this little piece of code. They need to have an eye on the long term. If you're working on a data schematic, for example, there could be a little attribute there, a little piece of data there, which could have much longer term consequences. So ethics need to be built into what we do as a cultural thing, I think. And the other thing is sustainability. It has to be sustainable for the future, both with regard to well, I suppose primarily to do with the climate as well. But your point about sort of tech fatigue, you don't want to have to keep introducing new updates all the time. So those are the themes that I see. In terms of the challenges, I think there's technical debt. I think every library we work with operates in a unique context. Its systems are unique. Its people, their skills, their experience is unique. The culture is unique. And that creates quite a difficult challenge, is when you're developing something, we as tech vendors need to develop something that works for everybody. And that can be quite a challenge, because you might end up with a horrible compromise. We hope we don't. Hope that the tech we develop is flexible. Yeah, and I think another challenge for the future is skills as well, and how those evolve and how those develop. And when we're looking at that interoperability, so that's a word I use a lot, and that's that collaboration, and it's understanding the standards that underpin the technologies that can work together. And I think that's probably those data standards, which is, I hesitate to use the word dull, it's vital. Understanding the detail of the standards that we use is absolutely critical to that interoperability and allowing the systems within an ecosystem to work together.
Thank you, John. Can I just pick you up on the privacy point?
Yes.
And I know that you didn't mention that necessarily as a challenge, but it was sort of in the context and the trends. And of course, you've always been focused on streamlining access, making it as easy as possible. And I wonder what your thoughts are on the trade-offs between protecting privacy on the one hand versus new capabilities that you can get on the other. For example, lots of tools now where we could get amazing insights that the library might want in patron workflows and what they're doing, but to do that we need to capture data that may have privacy concerns. How do you approach that at OpenAthens?
So, well, OpenAthens, we're right in the middle of that, because the data that we manage can be pseudonymous. If everything was truly anonymous, you don't need data protection at all. That goes out the window. So we worked to make sure that the data that we use is privacy preserving based on the user consent. So a lot of it becomes about user consent. And there is no right answer to this. It's a battle, I think, and there are different perspectives. You have a view which is that any data aggregation or data capture is sort of surveillance capitalism and is dangerous. But you also have that view that data that improves the experience, improves the opportunities for the learners, is really, really important. So there's no right area, and what we try and do is create options for both perspectives.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to try and make a segue now that I'm not going to do very well to Sean, but I guess maybe there's a connection there around the data you've been building around citations and citation context. But I just wanted to bring you perhaps a little introduction to Scite for those who aren't familiar, and also your biggest challenges. Having been for a few years now in space, and what your thoughts are about emerging tech.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? So how many of you have heard of Scite? I don't know how much detail to get into. Okay, good. I'll get into some detail then. So Scite is a sort of discovery platform as well as an evaluation platform. So if you go to scite.ai, you can look up any scholarly work with the DOI, and it will pull up what is sort of our core product. That's our report page. And that page will show some metadata and some other things you would probably expect. But what makes Scite unique is it will show a list, a list of papers that cite that paper, and it will also show you the text of the citations themselves. So it will basically show you in one page, what papers are saying about a given paper. And on top of that, we've built some deep learning that will actually classify those citation statements, that citation text, as being supporting, that is, replicating a finding or finding something that's in concert with another, contrasting, so finding failure to replicate or not finding something in concert with another paper, or just mentioning, which is not a valent statement at all. And so with that, we can build up sort of citation tallies based on that typology. And we've built a number of different features sort of around that theme of citations and citation contexts and being able to classify that citation text. So I encourage everyone to play around with it and let us know what you think. In terms of challenges, I definitely agree with some of what's already been said. Definitely there is, I think, the next new thing fatigue, I guess. I don't know what to call it. But I speak with a lot of librarians as part of our discussions, and I do get the sense that there is a bit of, kind of what Talia was saying, another thing that I have to learn. So I very much agree with that. I think for us, there's also a challenge in communicating exactly what our tool does. And I think as Matt was saying, there are established technologies that are discovery platforms, and people naturally just want to say, oh, this is like X. Oh, this is like this other product that I'm familiar with and that we're using. And while there are certainly similarities between Scite and other services, that idea of really centering the citations to a paper and doing evaluations and establishing connections based on that is something that no one else really does in quite the way that we do. So it's been, I think we do a good job of communicating, but that has been one of the challenges is sort of saying, here's what our product does and here's the use case for it. There's also, I think, sometimes a disconnect because we have a large user base of, we have institutional subscribers, but we also have a large user base of individual subscribers. And so people who, just individually subscribe to our service, they do that because they understand that we're a product that can help them write their paper or their thesis or their dissertation or their grant proposal. So they see the value in it immediately. And I think librarians also see the value in it pretty clearly. And I don't usually have to do much explaining as to why this is a useful tool. I think that sometimes where the challenge comes up is in communicating the value of an emerging technology to people at higher levels of an institution. And I'm thinking here as my frame of reference is American universities, so this could be not the case everywhere, but they tend to be fairly conservative institutions, not politically, but just in terms of what things they're willing to try. And so if you have a long-standing, institutional subscription to a tool, saying that we need this additional tool or this tool that could be a replacement for something that you've been using for 20 years, that's a hard sell. And for a library that's on board that wants a subscription, helping them to communicate, no, here's why this thing is different and here's why it's a unique value, I think is one of the challenges that we've had. So.
Thank you, Sean. I'm actually really interested in that individual subscribers and the library dynamic because you're sort of unique among us here in that respect, although we do have an individual subscriber option for Cywil as well. I suppose my question there is when you're speaking with libraries, how do you advocate for the library being engaged with a tool that could just as easily be purchased directly by individual subscribers? We talked about it a little bit in a reference manager session yesterday about a proliferation of tools for students and academics, whether they're sort of hacky type tools of like do your literature review fast, etc. Why should the library be involved there as opposed to just saying, as a student you can go out yourself or as a faculty member?
No, that's a great question. So, in my experience, libraries want to be involved, and so we have, in terms of those individual subscribers, we have faculty members and graduate students, but we also have a large number of undergraduates who use our tool to help them write term papers. And I think my sense is that librarians tend to think of, if there's a tool that's out there that our students especially, who are, not sort of flush with cash usually, if they're out there having to pay for it on their own, that is something that we'd rather them not have to do. We would rather be able to provide that service at the institutional level. But also just integrating the tool with, the other things that the library does. Libraries want to be able to help educate people on how to use the tool effectively. And, we try to do that ourselves at a company level, but I think libraries are sometimes much more effective at that because they understand the population they're working with, they understand the needs of the faculty and the students. So there are a lot of things that come along with an institutional subscription that go well beyond just sort of, IP authentication, I don't have to log in order to use it. That's nice, but what really is even better is when libraries become really involved with the process of educating users and showing how the tool can be useful to the university community. So, if that answers your question.
No, that does. Thank you. That's brilliant. So I think I might pause for a moment here to see if there are any questions from the audience as well. And while asking you to think about that, I do have a question up my sleeve. So please think about your questions, and then Sufyan can send around the... Oh, fantastic, we have a question already. I think, are we throwing it? Or It's soft, it's soft.
Do you want to go first, Matt, and then I'll...
Good idea. Well, I'll start us off then. We talked a little bit across lots of areas I wanted to talk about already in terms of trends and benefits to libraries and challenges. The one area we haven't talked about yet, which I thought would be great to get your insights on, is that you all engage with libraries all over the world on a regular basis. So between you, got a fantastic insight into what everyone's talking about. Are there any trends that you think are unobvious or that we might not have talked about in this conference that libraries are talking about at the moment and that there isn't yet a solution for, where emerging technology should come into that space and should be looking for solutions? And that open-ended question to any of you.
Okay, hi. We're all looking at each other, who goes first. First off, John, I'm a little bit upset that Scite wasn't around when I was writing my thesis, so I'm gonna put that on you.
I basically built it so that I could use it.
Really annoyed at that. So when we're talking about trends, I think one of the things, it's gonna sound a little strange, but I wanna go to the past a little bit. I think that COVID revealed some really ugly truths that libraries weren't really fully aware of, specifically dealing with inequities, and that they were brought into the spotlight, I think. Because when you close access to the building for everybody, it revealed issues that a portion of your population were experiencing that you might not have been aware of. So I'm talking about things like technology inequality. Not everyone has a computer, not everyone has smart devices. I'm talking about internet inequality. Not everybody has high-speed broadband access and can download that 400-page ebook or watch that streaming video. I'm talking about website accessibility issues. I can tell you from 2020 to 2021, Springshare had more requests for our VPAT and more questions about whether LibGuides was accessible, was LibAnswers accessible, than we had in 10 years combined. So suddenly everybody was focused on accessibility. And of course, language barriers, are your web interfaces, your digital touch points, are they accessible to people from, multiple language speakers? So I think thinking about that problem, how COVID revealed some of these inequities has affected some trends that I'm seeing for the future. I also read just recently the updated Libraries Future Report, and right in the beginning, page 3, and you should read it, it's really good. It said that students didn't really know what the library had to offer outside of the space, outside of the physical space, which I think is a real issue of lack of marketing, particularly in academic libraries. You know, how many of you have a dedicated marketing department or even a position? Or is it something somebody just does when they have time, you know, write the newsletter, things like that? So when I think about trends, I think about those two things. So when I think libraries are learning a little bit from the experience from COVID, I'm seeing a lot more focus on digital services than existed, because when your doors closed, you suddenly realized, oh no, we need to have chat reference, we need to have ways for them to contact us. So there was this, and it's continued on, right? So I'm seeing a lot more focus on digital services. People are using the LibCal appointments and now offering not just in-person appointments, but online appointments, you know, for people who physically can't come to the building. A lot more online content on LibGuides. We saw a huge spike in guides created, and it's still continuing. I'm seeing a lot more work from home and hybrid for library staff, right? How many of you are back in the office full-time, or kind of a bit of a mix, or fully online? Okay, so we're seeing that, and because of that, we're seeing a lot more need for like secure staff intranets and staff-to-staff online communication, because you can't just pop over to their office anymore, right? And I'm seeing a lot more, as a trend, point-of-need services. So embedding not just library resources, but library services where the patron is. Which is one of the integrations we have with Lean Library Futures is our LibChat integration. So they can chat with a librarian no matter what web page they're on, whether they're on Google or Wikipedia, they can get librarian help without having to go, you know, to the library website. One thing I'm not seeing, which I'm a little bit interested, you know, if anybody wants to comment on it, is I'm not seeing academic libraries investing in marketing. Either marketing, email marketing, or really kind of anything outside of just, you know, we're putting up our library newsletter, but actual really doing targeted outreach marketing. Email marketing has been around 30 years now, and I really don't know many academic libraries who are really doing email marketing, you know, kind of using an actual email marketing tool to communicate to their user groups. And they're different user groups. You know, faculty have different needs than students that have different needs to community members. And how do you communicate all of those different types of services if you're not doing kind of proactive, engaging email marketing? So, that's fine.
Amazing, amazing. Sean and John, would you like to come in on that?
The only point I was going to make was about equity of access, which you've talked about. So that's, and we've seen that all over the world and in the UK as well. So they're universal challenges.
I'm sorry, I was thinking about what Talia was saying, and now I've forgotten what the question was. I'm sorry.
It was so open-ended. If you like, we can come back to it. Maybe just thinking of time, it would be lovely to have the question from the audience as well.
Okay, yeah, that's working. So this was a question specifically to Sean, and I have to confess I'm not super familiar with Scite. I've just been kind of quickly skimming through the pages. I can imagine a lot of my academic staff looking at a lot of the stuff that it does, you know, presenting which are the supporting, which are the contrasting citations, and, you know, doing some of the initial evaluation and saying, my students are meant to do that themselves. That's their work. And I'm kind of conscious that one of the things my university has started doing is requiring students to say when they submit an assignment online, have they used ChatGPT, and if so, what have they used it to do? Where is the borderline between this is a really useful supporting tool and this is cheating?
Wow, that's a good question. So let me actually just sort of in full disclosure, in addition to my work at Scite that I co-founded, I'm also a university professor. So I'm a psychology professor at Murray State in Kentucky. And so we have this conversation, you know, I have this conversation with my colleagues at Scite and also with my colleagues at the university. So the first thing that I would say is that the tool will show you what papers say about each other, but that's it. Which the job that I think of as my students, as a professor who assigns term papers, and I encourage my students to use Scite. Their job is to basically take that pattern of supporting or contrasting citations and make sense out of it. And when I teach students how to write a scientific, literature review, I say, you need to be connecting these dots between different studies in your area of interest and show how they're related to one another. And my feeling is, as an instructor, is that the report page that we have is a really useful starting place for that. But it's no substitute for actually doing the work yourself. Now, what sometimes has become a substitute for doing the work yourself, as you mentioned, is ChatGPT. And we actually have a tool, we call it Scite Assistant, which leverages the large language models from OpenAI, where you can pose a question in natural language and it will give you an answer. But unlike ChatGPT, it's based on the scientific literature because we have access to the full text of papers. It will actually check its answer to make sure that it's correct and make sure that the references exist. So there's no that sort of hallucination phenomenon that we've identified with ChatGPT. But it will give an answer and it will give you references for all of the different things that it says in response. And when ChatGPT first emerged, I guess it was late last year, and I was talking about this with my colleagues at the university, there was sort of this distributed response. Some people were sort of hair on fire, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I have to redo all of my assignments. I'm not going to be able to assign term papers anymore because of this. And I understand that response. But then on the other side, I had colleagues, and I eventually sort of fell into this camp myself that just said, this is the way that it is now. And we're going to have to figure out how to teach and how to evaluate, acknowledging that these tools exist and, sort of accommodating that. In fact, one friend of mine actually and I were talking about this, and he was like, yeah, I've been using ChatGPT to write exam questions, and it's great, right? So we have, they're very sort of a different end of the spectrum. I think that is a challenge. And the other part about it is, as people who are developing the product, it's part of our job is to really emphasize to our users, to libraries, to students and faculty, how to use the tool in an ethical way, how to use the tool that's not substituting your own thoughts. And I think that may take a little while. It may be sort of disruptive, making that transition. But, and that's on us to communicate with that. And it's also, a collaboration that we want to have with libraries, because libraries are sort of the first point of contact for a tool like ours. And we need feedback. We need librarians to tell us, here's a problem that our faculty and our instructors are facing. Here's a thing that we've noticed our students are doing. Help us to figure out how to ensure that this doesn't become really an ethical quandary. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
I'd love to continue that thread if that's all right, Sean. I think we've actually had some conversations with libraries, with Lean Library, where we're inserting the library into the workflow, bringing in, the chat service that Talia kindly mentioned, and discovery, etc. And some libraries have said, a similar thread to the question, that was kind of twofold really, like, should the library even be there? Maybe our patrons just want to be left alone. And secondly, this doesn't seem to be complementary to our information literacy training, where we're trying to say that you're responsible and we don't want to serve it on a platter. And on the first thing, I would really advocate strongly that I think that libraries absolutely should be there. And I feel that I talked a little bit about it yesterday, that with these challenges around huge amount of academic content that's going to be out there and disinformation, everything else, it's just a different landscape for those patrons than it was like when I was at university, where maybe it was okay then to be left to your own devices and it was a good thing. Right now, they really need that support. And Emma talked about it a little bit as well when she was talking about the pressure on students with exams, where there's more assessment than ever before. I think it seems reasonable in that context to think differently about things like article summaries and, you know, templates for your writing. It won't replace the genuine creative thought, and they will still need to develop lots of skills, but I think it's such a different world now. Yeah. So, other questions from the audience as well? If not, I have more up my sleeve. Sufyan will... Shall we try?
Here you go. Ready?
Probably a bit of a boring library question, but given a lot of my work is involved in procuring new suppliers, and how do you, especially as that emerging in new companies, work to ensure that you make the procuring of your service as easy as possible through things like frameworks and, you know, because otherwise I had to fill out waiver form after waiver form, very tedious, and, you know, ensuring that you meet privacy and accessibility regulations, but also make it obvious that you do so that I don't have to go and find that information from you.
That's an amazing question. I can give an answer, but I thought I would defer to colleagues.
It's a really good question. It's quite a tricky one. I think I want to talk about standards again. So there's an ITIL certification, which we have as software. In terms of software procurement, I know JISC has its collections agency, which should do a lot of that diligence on your behalf. The security and the privacy is a really interesting one, because we work with corporate libraries where we are seeing the burden on us to show that we are privacy preserving and secure is really quite high. So I think there needs to be some level of certification that says we follow these standards, we've met these standards, and we are audited annually. And I guess, again, that's about making sure that that audit is public and common. But certainly it's on the vendor to make it easy for the library.
I wanted to... Oh, sorry.
No.
I just wanted to echo on the frameworks bit and to say that we absolutely should be making it easier. We should be on those frameworks. Sometimes it's not as easy as one would think. I mean, for us, we're in a fortunate position because of our SAGE parent group, that we have the resource internally in terms of legal, etc., and the connections to get into frameworks. But for other emerging companies, I don't think that's as easy, particularly when they have to think about legal setups in different countries. And, like, you know, we were talking to colleagues the other day about how you might sell in Australia, for example, which is really difficult. But the other thing I want to say is that, and this is why we've deliberately talked about emerging technology as opposed to legacy technology, is that sometimes those legacy technologies are so powerful and so present that the entire framework structure and the RFP structure is set up to say, we are looking for this specifically. You know, I would imagine, I don't want to put Sean on the spot, but I imagine, unfortunately, there's no tender yet that says we need a citation context tool. So sometimes it's quite hard to, it'll happen. Quite hard to get into those frameworks. And then on accessibility, I think that's such an important point, and I think goes to what Talia was saying, that if we've learned anything from the increased interest there the last few years, it's that when you're developing new technology in complex ways where you have to create new code, and we should be thinking about accessibility first, whereas sometimes because we want to get to market so quickly and we're really excited about getting out there, you can cut corners and you can not take that as seriously as you can, but I just don't think that's possible anymore. I think that everybody recognizes that.
I was just going to add that there's so many certifications and standards, you know, internationally around the world, but even, you know, across different library types. You know, just from a U.S. perspective, there's this one for just government libraries called FedRAMP, and then there's another one just for the state of Texas called TexRAMP. Okay, so there are so many of them. It can and they are very expensive to do. We're not talking like $1,000. We're talking like $300,000 to do a certification, that we have to be very selective in the ones that we go for to ensure that we're getting the most bang for the buck, that we're not then passing that cost on to clients by raising fees. We don't want to do that, right? So, we try and think more like, will this certification be good for everybody around the world for all different library types? And the other thing I want to point out is, when you were talking about like certifications and security, a company is really only as secure as an employee's weakest password. So when we're talking about security, oftentimes it's important to, as John was saying, the auditing process, and we're SOC 2 compliant, so we get audited twice a year. Where we as employees, our access to things and our password strength is carefully monitored. So I, in marketing, do not have access to the code repository, nor should I, right? So that kind of area is you should look at frameworks that focus on that, is what I'm trying to say, that that's the biggest threat to security and privacy.
So no Springshare 2023 exclamation mark?
No. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one thing that we've tried to do, just to build on what Talia was saying a little bit, is, so I should say, we're a smaller team, so this the sort of thing, as you scale, becomes even more challenging. But one thing that occurs to me is that there are things you can do to design your product to minimize the the risk to individual users. So, for example, with institutional subscriptions, you don't have to have a Scite account to use our tool. If you're on campus, it just works, right? And there are things that you get by signing up and having an account and bringing that into it. But I think that, and this is maybe not related to standards directly, but that sort of just ease of use and not having to have that friction and that additional component of user privacy and security for users who don't need that level of use is probably helpful, we think.
Brilliant. Well, I think very sadly, we'll have to leave it there for the break. Make sure you can get some coffee and some treats. Please join me in thanking the panel for that fascinating conversation.
Thanks, everyone.